Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Set the Line podcast. As always, I'm Sam Calder, joined by the ultimate setter of the line himself, Braden Hoover. And Braden, we'd be fools, we'd be remiss if we didn't start this episode off by talking about the big game that occurred last night, the Super Bowl. The Chiefs won in a thrilling game, 25-22 in overtime. Braden, what do you make of this game, and what do you make of the new dynasty that has been underway for a little while, but the new GOAT comparisons with Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes?
Well, there's really just so much to unpack here. I want to start with highlighting how well Trent McDuffie played. To me, I think if that game uh, doesn't have an ending the way it does, where Mahomes leads the Chiefs on the game-winning touchdown drive, he is the Super Bowl MVP. Trent McDuffie locking up Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel was the only reason the Chiefs were able to stay in the game, despite their offensive struggles. For most of the first half, really, they couldn't get anything going offensively. They kick a field goal on their last drive of the first half for their only points of the first half. But because their defense was able to lock down these elite San Francisco wide receivers, they gave themselves a shot and they were able to come back from that as a result. The offense was given a little bit of time to get going, which is absolutely huge. We haven't really seen that from many Mahomes led teams over the past few years. It's been a situation where if the offense can't score, the team is going to lose the ball game. And I think this new Chiefs defense is really, really set up to potentially have them in the driver's seat for a three-peat. They are my Super Bowl pick for next year currently. I haven't made one yet, but they are set up for long-term success 100%. And then as for the 49ers, I think that the big thing you have to look at is why did they take the ball to start overtime? When they won the coin toss, I was sitting there wondering, like, why did they not kick off? With the new overtime rules, really it makes more sense to defer because even if you give up a touchdown on the first drive, you know you need a touchdown on your drive. And at that point, you might as well go for two and not give the other team the ball back. I could kind of understand it if they thought they were going to be able to hold Kansas City to a field goal, but you can't rely on that with Patrick Mahomes. And even when the 49ers had that 4th and 4, I was thinking they should go for that. You make Mahomes drive 60 yards for a field goal to win the game regardless, as opposed to a touchdown to win the game. Plus, there's a chance of you converting that 4th and 4 and giving yourself a chance to win. So overall, I think it was a well-coached game from Kyle Shanahan up until overtime for the most part, but unfortunately, that's what people are going to remember.
And yeah, I know Tony Romo on the broadcast last night made a note about the defense was just on the field for that Chiefs final drive in regulation. Maybe Shanahan wanted to give their defense a bit of time to rest. But yeah, I know Andy Reid came out this morning and said that if they had won the toss, they would have taken the opportunity to kick the ball off as well. So they basically got what they wanted, and at the end. So yeah, it was a great game, and I think the loss of Dre Greenlaw for the Niners was possibly the difference in that game as well. Travis Kelce in that first half, one catch for 1 yard on one target, and then Dre Greenlaw tears his Achilles, which I believe that has been confirmed as a torn Achilles. But Travis Kelce then catches 8 balls for 92 yards in the second half in overtime. So that was a huge loss, and that Chiefs offense did not look like they were going to be able to do anything with him locked up. So I think that was a big loss in that game. But yeah, certainly a huge win for the Chiefs, huge win for that dynasty. Mahomes gets his third and his fourth Super Bowl appearance. And yeah, it sounds like Kelsey's going to be back. Chris Jones is going to be back. So no reason to think that they can't three-peat again next year. As for the main topic of today's episode, we are back with our second MLB divisional preview. This time we have the AL Central. We're going to get things started here with our favorite team, the Minnesota Twins. And Braden, I will let you go ahead and read off how the Twins are projected to line up this year.
Sure. So behind the plate, it's going to be a platoon of Ryan Jeffers and Christian Vasquez. Jeffers is the better hitter. Vasquez is usually the better defender. Then at first base, it's probably going to be Carlos Santana and a little bit of Alex Kirilloff. I'd expect Santana to DH quite a bit. Fangraphs has him projected to split about 50% at first base, 15% at DH. I think Kirilloff is probably going to be starting at first base more often than Carlos Santana personally. At second base, we have Edward Julian. At shortstop, it's Carlos Correa. At third base, Royce Lewis. And then in the outfield from left to right, Matt Wallner, Byron Buxton, and Max Kepler. I'd assume there's going to be a decent amount of Willie Castro and Trevor Larnach playing in the outfield as well. Buxton's probably going to take some time to DH, even though he's going back to center field this year. I would expect him to not play there full time. Oh, and then out of the pitching staff, we have Pablo Lopez, Joe Ryan, Bailey Ober, Chris Paddock, and Anthony DeSclafani as the projected five-man rotation to start the year. I'd expect we'll see a decent amount of Louis Varland in there as well. There's going to be somebody that gets injured, probably Chris Paddock, knowing his history. But regardless, the Twins are probably going to be pitching at least six different starters throughout the year. And then some notable names out of the bullpen. Joan Duran, I can never pronounce his name correctly, Griffin Jacks, Brock Stewart, and Caleb Thielebar.
And yeah, the Twins have actually added some bullpen arms as well over the past couple of weeks, trading away Jorge Polanco and getting Justin Topa from the Mariners. And then just the other day, trading away Nick Gordon for Stephen Okert from the Marlins, a nice lefty. So yeah, should be a pretty good bullpen this year, hopefully for the Twins. But let's go ahead and get things started with some impact players. And let's go ahead and talk about Pablo Lopez. I have him at number 32 in categories leagues and number 31 in points leagues. You know, statistically, he was not exceptional last year. He had, I think right around a 3.7 ERA, something like that. But his expected metrics were sensational last season. He was one of the top four pitchers in terms of expected ERA. His expected ERA was 3 flat. And his metrics on StatCast, like it's all red. It's exactly what you want to see. He's 64th percentile in fastball velo, and that is his worst metric on StatCast page. Had 194 innings pitched last year, 234 strikeouts, had a couple of fantastic starts in the postseason. There's really not a whole lot to dislike about Pablo Lopez. And, I'm biased as a Twins fan. I have him ranked much higher than the general consensus would. But I think we're in for a big year out of Pablo Lopez.
Yeah, I think Pablo Lopez is a great value as well. You look at last year where Sonny Gray had the better statistics, but there's a reason the Minnesota Twins started Pablo Lopez in Game 1 of the American League Wild Card Series against Toronto, and a reason they were okay letting Sonny Gray walk as opposed to bringing him back on a deal like the Cardinals ended up giving him. Pablo Lopez is a legitimate ace. We saw that for the first time last year because he was kind of overshadowed by Sandy Alcantara when he was in Miami. The Twins gave up Luis Arias for him for a reason. I think Pablo Lopez is in for a top 3 finish in AL Cy Young voting.
As for Royce Lewis, I have him at number 56 in categories, number 62 in points. He's a very high risk, high reward type player in fantasy, especially, for somebody who's going in this range. And I am higher on him than the general consensus again. But, I mean, look at what he's done every step of the way. Last season, in just 58 games in the majors, hit 15 home runs, 52 RBIs, 36 runs scored, drew 20 walks as well, and stole 6 bases. I mean, in his brief stint at AAA last year, 12 games, hit 356. In 2022, his brief stint in the majors hit 300. In the minors, hit 313. I mean, he mashes everywhere he goes. And I wouldn't expect him to hit, 15 homers in his first 60 games again this year. But he's done it before. It's not like it would be, saying something crazy to what happened. So I do think he'll have a step down from where he was last year. His expected metrics would indicate that. His expected batting average was 265. So still not bad, but not at the 309 mark that it was last year. But dude hits the ball, and he hits the ball hard. And he's going to be hitting in the heart of the Twins lineup. So he's, again, a high risk, high reward player, but I think he's going to be more likely to reward you than harm you.
Yeah, I agree. I think with Royce Lewis, I'd say about 80% of the risk is just injuries. We've seen over the last couple of years that he's had some injuries. He's torn his ACL twice. I can't remember if it's the same ACL or if it's been each ACL. But there's some injury risk there. He's had some other issues with, I think, his foot or ankle or something over the past year or so as well. So if he's on the field, he's going to be an extremely, extremely productive player. The question is going to be how much time is he going to miss? If you can get 100 games out of Royce Lewis, I think you're going to be in a very, very good spot getting him around that, pick 70 mark of a fantasy draft. If you can get 120 games out of Royce Lewis or more than that, you're going to get an extremely good return on investment. I am all bought in on Royce Lewis this year. I've been drafting him a bunch in my underdog best ball leagues for the coming year. So I'm very excited for him.
And yeah, I mean, we're talking about, if all goes well for Royce Lewis, this could be somebody who's being drafted in like the Jose Ramirez range next year, who we'll talk about a little bit later. But sky's the limit for Royce Lewis, definitely. As for Joan Duran, that is a very hard name to pronounce. You're right about that. I have him at number 59, right behind Royce Lewis in categories. Number 73 in points leagues. Took a slight step back from where he was in 2022, but that's not saying a whole lot. His ERA went from 1.86 all the way down to 2.45 last year, just horrible. And his whip was not bad either, right around 1.1. Strikes out a lot of guys. He's going to blow fastballs right by everybody. And has some disgusting off speed and breaking pitches to mix in with that. The walk percentage was up from 2022. The strikeout percentage was slightly down, and by slightly down I mean like 0.5%. But his Statcast page is fantastic. I mean, his expected ERA was 2.6. That's 99th percentile. So I think the biggest question with him is going to be, is he going to be the exclusive closer? Obviously, Griffin Jacks got some opportunities last year. Brock Stewart, it would not surprise me if he gets some chances as well late in games. So I think that's really the kind of only big concern you have for him. Only had 27 saves last year, and a decent amount of innings. So I think that's really the only thing that would hold him back.
Yeah, the Twins kind of used Duran last year a lot as more of just a high leverage guy than an exclusive ninth inning closer. We saw him quite a bit come into the eighth inning to face, the 2, 3, 4 of a team's batting order, as opposed to saving him to the ninth inning. So when you're drafting him pretty much specifically to get saves, you're going to get dinged a little bit on that. However, I do think he's a good value in category leagues. In points leagues, I'm not as sold on him, just because relievers in general kind of have a tax in that league, in that format, because you're getting a lot more points from your starting pitchers pitching a lot more innings, getting more chances to get outs, more chances to get strikeouts. So I think I would probably stay away from Duran for the most part in a points league, but my kind of philosophy is just draft a bunch of starters in points leagues regardless. So this is not really a Duran thing, more of an all reliever thing. I think I would probably bet on him being around that spot in categories leagues. Should get a decent amount of saves regardless. The AL Central is not super great, so could get 30 to 35 saves. And if you're drafting a guy in the early 60s to maybe late 60s, that's exactly what you need from him.
And then I want to touch on a couple of Twin starters here that are going in the mid to late rounds of drafts, and that is Joe Ryan and Bailey Ober. I have Joe Ryan at 142 in categories and 125 in points leagues, whereas I have Bailey Ober at 178 and 149, respectively. Braden, I want to ask you, who are you more likely to draft of these two? Because statistically, they're not that far off, and you can get Bailey Ober, 3, 4 rounds later usually.
I think I would lean with Ober. Joe Ryan is definitely more of like a household name, but you mentioned looking at their statistics. They are roughly very similar pitchers. Joe Ryan's probably going to get you a few more strikeouts, but I think Ober is better at kind of limiting those hits, limiting those walks, and he's less prone to having explosive bad games against him. I can think of a couple with Joe Ryan. There was that one game against the Padres a couple years back where he gave up like 10 runs. Rocco Baldelli just like left him in there to suffer for a while because he gave up like 8 runs in the first 2 innings, and Rocco was like, "Fuck it, Joe, you're going to pitch 5 innings regardless." So his ERA got very inflated from that. Um, with Bailey Ober, I think you're going to see more consistency. So it really depends on kind of overall what you need from your team. Although I usually like to go a little bit more high risk, high reward in the mid rounds. Once I get to the late rounds, I'm kind of tending for stability at that point, unless I'm getting a guy who's like an extreme dart throw in like my last round. So I would lean with Ober on their current ADP.
I would agree with you. I would go with Ober as well. Joe Ryan, he did battle some injuries in the second half of last season, but boy was he bad. His first half ERA 3.7. You'll take that. That's pretty good. Second half was over 6, and granted, it was in half the amount of innings that he threw in the first half. But his batting average allowed in the first half 222, second half 294. On base percentage went from 258 to 347, and perhaps the most alarming, the slugging percentage 378 in the first half. Braden, take a guess as to what it was in the second half.
Based on that, I'm going to say 730.
All right, not quite that high, but
Okay.
588, which is
Oof.
not good either way. So, yeah, not what you're looking for out of Joe Ryan. And granted, like I said, he did battle some injuries, but at the same time, I mean, his fastball is not going to blow by anybody. And I think there's been I saw some news article that perhaps Joe Ryan's fastball is not as effective as it once was. So I'm a little worried about Joe Ryan. If he falls, certainly take a chance on him. It's worthwhile. But I would agree that I would go Bailey over there. As for some strengths and weaknesses of this Twins team, Braden, what do you see being the biggest strength?
I think the Minnesota Twins' biggest strength this year is going to be the bullpen. In 2023, the Twins are about middle of the pack in terms of ERA for the bullpen at 3.95, which was 15th in the major leagues. But the WHIP was fifth best at a 1.25. You have the obvious suspects with Yohan Duran, Griffin Jacks, and Brock Stewart all being very, very good last year. And then the Twins brought in quite a few new additions this year. Justin Topa comes over from Seattle. He had a 2.61 ERA and a 2.94 expected ERA last year in 2023. Gets a lot of ground balls, avoids giving up hard contact, exactly what you're looking for from a reliever, especially in like a situational area where if you're bringing him in with two outs, two guys on base, you need that ground ball. Steven Okert comes over from Miami in a trade for Nick Gordon. He had a kind of rough last year, 4.45 ERA, but in 2022 he was at 2.98, 2.75 in 2021. Has a very good breaking ball, gets a lot of strikeouts, so that's going to be big for the Twins. Jay Jackson comes over from Toronto. He's 36 years old, but last year with Toronto had a 2.12 ERA and a .91 WHIP. Did only pitch 29 and two-thirds innings, but if he can replicate that to even a similar extent, being in like the mid threes with like a 1.1 WHIP, I would absolutely take that for the Twins. And then Josh Stalmont comes over from Kansas City. He's had a couple of bad seasons back to back, but he had a 2.88 ERA and a 1.07 WHIP in 2021. So if he can recapture that magic, that would be massive. Fangraphs projects the Twins have the second best bullpen in Major League Baseball and the best in the American League, and I can't disagree with that. The Twins bullpen is the strength of this team for sure.
And yeah, I was just going to touch on that Fangraph thing you mentioned with the best bullpen in the American League. So yeah, I would certainly agree that that's the strength of this team. Biggest weakness, I think, is just going to be the on-base skills of this lineup. It's built around power bats. The team lead in batting average last year among players with more than 300 at bats was Donovan Solano, who had 282. After that, it was Edward Julian, who had 263. And the highest projected batting average this year of anybody on the Twins is Royce Lewis at 265. Now, you don't need everybody to hit 300, certainly to win games. But when your team on base percentage last year is 326, mixed with the amount of injuries that the Twins usually have, that's pretty tough to win games with sometimes. So I do think that while you don't necessarily need, everybody to be like a Luis Arise, you do need guys that are able to get on base for the power bats in your lineup. And I just don't know that that's going to be there.
Yeah, I mean, for the regular season, you're not going to win games with solo home runs. And if you can't win games in the regular season, you can't make it to the playoffs, or solo home runs might win you games. So I think overall the Twins need to figure out whether that's improvement from within or bringing in more guys out of the free agency pool. I've seen us linked to Tommy Pham um, to maybe get on base a little bit more. Just at that point, at least you're getting, extra base hits driving in runs as opposed to either a singular run on a homer or a two out bases empty double.
And Braden, who is your breakout player from the Twins this year?
For the Twins, I'll go with Cody Funderburk. He's a bullpen pitcher, so I'll stick with my theme there. Due for a breakout in 2023 for a variety of reasons. One of those being his name, just an awesome last name, Cody Funderburk. Um, but along with having one of the best names in baseball, he was phenomenal in a limited sample size last year. Only pitched 12 innings, but he gave up just one earned run, struck out 19 batters, and his StatCast page is extremely, extremely good. I can't see the percentiles. He didn't qualify for those, but there is a lot of red there for the expected ERA of 244, expected batting average of 158, ground ball percentage of over 50%, a 40.4% strikeout rate, 34.5% whiff rate. Now, he doesn't throw very fast. He's a very much similar to, I guess, Danny Colombe of the Baltimore Orioles in terms of the fact that they get their strikeouts with, kind of the slower off-speed stuff. But I think Cody Funderburk can make this weird pitching style work.
Yeah, I would agree. And he's shown promise before, so I think he could be a really nice piece of that bullpen. So I like that pick. I'm going to kind of cheat with mine. I'm going to go with Matt Wallner, who is projected to be the starting left fielder, I belied you said. Hit 249 last season, with a 370 on base percentage and a 507 slugging percentage, a very quiet 877 OPS. His 600 at bat pace last year was good for 40 home runs, and his ex WOBA last year, which basically combines quality of contact with your on base skills, was 374. And that doesn't qualify among the league because of his limited at bats. But if it did, that would be top 20 across the league. The only problem with Matt Wallner is that he cannot hit lefties for shit. He had 119 against lefties last year. Granted, that was in like 46 plate appearances or something like that, a very small amount. But I think he might just end up being the strong side platoon against righties. But either way, that should get him plenty of at bats. And so I think this is going to be a very, very big breakout year for Matt Wallner.
Yeah, we saw last year with Wallner where Rocco Baldelli would pinch hit for him in like the fifth inning with like a Donovan Solano or Willie Castro, and he would do vice versa with Wallner on the bench too, depending on the matchups. So I would expect to maybe see some of that at least early in the year until Wallner can prove he can hit lefties. Um, but overall, I think he'll learn at some point. And then as for our Twins breakout picks overall, I think most people would have expected Royce Lewis to be in this, but I think we can both agree that Royce Lewis has already broken out and just needs to stay healthy. I was reading a Bleacher Report article about like the third base plan in the future for every MLB team. They said that Royce was a trendy breakout pick. He's too trendy for us, I think. I think he's already there.
Yeah, I would agree. I think he has broken out. I think we saw that last year and in the postseason. So yeah, I don't know that you can really count that as a breakout player, but if you could, certainly he'd be at the top of the list. As for the second place Detroit Tigers, and yeah, it was a very weak division in the AL Central last year. But Braden, how are the Tigers projected to line up this year?
Tigers will have Jake Rogers and Carson Kelly behind the plate. I'd expect Rogers to play, probably 40% more than Kelly. Spencer Torkelson manning first base. Colt Keith and Andy Ibanez will be second base. I think Colt Keith is probably not going to be on the opening day roster, but he could be. And regardless, he should be up at the major leagues at some point throughout the year. Javier Baez at shortstop. Matt Vierling, Zach McKinstry, combining at third base with a little bit of Andy Ibanez there, probably once Colt Keith gets brought up. Mark Canha out in left field, along with Akil Baddoo a little bit. Parker Meadows in center, Riley Green in right field, and Kerry Carpenter as the designated hitter. On the pitching mound, you have Tariq Skubal, new addition, Jack Flaherty, Reese Olson, Kenta Maeda, another new addition, and Matt Manning. Casey Mize might get in there as well. The former number one pick has kind of struggled so far, but I would expect him to crack the rotation at some point throughout the year, whether that's even through a six-man rotation Detroit could use. And then out of the bullpen, Alex Lang, Jason Foley, Will Vest, probably the only really notable names for them.
And let's go ahead and get things started with the ace of the rotation, Tarik Skubal, who is somebody who, like Pablo Lopez, I would love to have in all of my leagues. Had a 2.8 ERA last season over just 80 innings, did battle some injuries in the first half. But in 197 innings over the past 2 years, his cumulative ERA is right around 3, and his expected ERA is below 3. His expected ERA last season was 2.3, which is just crazy. That's 100th percentile, but would not qualify because of his only 80 innings. And his StatCast page is just ridiculous. A 33% strikeout rate to just a 4.5% walk rate, both of which are 96th percentile. Gives up a lot of ground balls, which you love to see. The lineup around him is probably the only thing that's going to hold him back. But, I love everything about the profile of Tarik Skubal. I have him number 41 in categories leagues, number 38 in points leagues, and I am targeting him anytime I can.
Yeah, I'm all in on Skubal as well. Last year I was a little bit concerned, but I got him very, very late in drafts and just kind of stuck him on the injured reserve. Either that or I picked him up throughout the year. I can't remember because he missed the first half of the season with Tommy John. But the fact that he was able to bounce back extremely quickly and have such a great season immediately removed from Tommy John was very impressive for me. Generally, when you see guys have those major UCL injuries, it takes them at least a year to kind of get back into the full swing of things. But the fact that Skubal was able to do that right away makes me feel very, very good about his prognosis for the 2024 season, especially in a weak division where there's a lot of bad hitting teams out there. Really, the Twins, there's going to be a lot of strikeouts to go around. The Guardians, there's not going to be a whole lot of runs allowed because none of those guys can hit for power at all. The Chicago White Sox are awful, and then the Kansas City Royals are a mixed bag of everything I mentioned. So I think Skubal is due for a very, very good year.
Another guy that I think is due for a very, very good year is going to be their starting first baseman, Spencer Torkelson. I have him at number 86 in categories leagues and number 102 in points leagues. Hit 233 last year with 31 homers, 94 RBIs, and 88 runs in 159 games played, a 759 OPS. His expected metrics would indicate that he underperformed, though. A 253 expected batting average, which is 20 points higher than his actual batting average. His expected slugging percentage was 40 points higher, and his ex-WOBA was 352 compared to his actual WOBA of 326. So I think that Spencer Torkelson could be somebody who, he's only 24 years old. I think he's going to be somebody that could be a very big breakout this season. But obviously, you can't call him a breakout because he's been around for a while. But I think that he's somebody who, if you're able to get later in drafts or even in the mid to late rounds, I think he's somebody that could be potentially starting first baseman by the end of the season in fantasy formats.
Yeah, I agree. Sam, could you do me a favor and read off Torkelson's full year statistics for me real quick?
I can. In 159 games, he had 141 hits, 34 doubles, 31 homers, 94 RBIs, three stolen bases, 67 walks to 171 strikeouts.
Thank you. I will now read his stats after August 1st, 2023. 209 at bats in 55 games, 51 hits, 11 doubles, 16 home runs, 36 RBIs, 24 walks. I think that Spencer Torkelson really kind of found his swing towards the second half of last year. Had a 526 slugging percentage, an 855 OPS, way better than his full season marks indicate. I think he is due for a massive, massive breakout. And I mean, it's a pretty obvious one coming because he was a former number one overall pick. So I'm not picking him as a breakout player by any means. But I think he's going to be a starting first baseman and potentially a top six first baseman in fantasy baseball this year.
I would absolutely agree. And then the last guy I want to hit on from the Tigers is young outfielder Riley Green. I have him at number 137 in categories leagues and 143 in points. I'm higher on him than the consensus is. And obviously there's some health concerns that I think are what's pushing him lower in drafts. And obviously he'll be coming off Tommy John surgery to start the season on his non-throwing arm, which I would have to argue how important is Tommy John surgery on your non-throwing arm, but I'm no expert. But his expected metrics are very, very good. Expected batting average 289. Ex-WOBA was 365, which was 89th percentile across the entire league. Hits the ball very, very hard. And I think if he gets that launch angle up from 6.6, I think he's a guy who, I don't think he's hit more than, he had 11 home runs last season. I think he could be a 25 homer guy if he gets that launch angle up a little bit. So I'm very, very high on Riley Green relative to where he's being taken.
Yeah, Riley Green was my breakout pick last year, and I think he's due for another great season as well. We saw him get that batting average kind of, solidified his first year in the league in 2022. It was a little bit up and down, but last year he was very, very consistent throughout the whole year. I think the next step, as you mentioned, is definitely the power. I don't know if that's going to be something that necessarily will come this year, but I expect we'll see at least some slight improvement from him. It might not be super drastic. I think he might probably be more in line with like a 15 home run season, but even for where he's going in drafts, I think that'd be a nice pickup.
Absolutely. The biggest strength of this Tigers team, in my opinion, is the young talent. I said it as the strength of their team last year, and I think it's true again this year as well. Spencer Torkelson, who we talked about, had a really nice year last season, a really nice second half. Riley Green also showed a lot of promise, as did Kerry Carpenter, who we didn't touch on, but another young guy that's got some promise. I'm going to touch on Colt Keith shortly. He's my breakout player pick. But the team's ceiling overall is pretty limited due to just the rest of the lineup around them. And the pitching staff outside of Tariq Skubal is not very good. So I think the young talent is probably the biggest thing to be excited about for this Tigers team.
Yeah, they have a lot of stuff to look forward to in the future. But as for the present right now, especially with Javier Baez's contract in the books, things are looking a little bit bleak. I think their ceiling is probably second place in the AL Central. I've seen them as, sort of a trendy pick to win it, but to me, they are just not close enough to the Twins and maybe not even close enough to the Guardians, depending on what their roster ends up shaping up like. to make it to that number one spot.
Yeah.
I think their biggest weakness as a result is their offense on the left side of the infield. You have Javi Baez, who last year, I didn't realize he was even this bad of a hitter, had a sub 600 OPS and a 60 WRC plus. So considering an average WRC plus is 100, not very good. Matt Vierling had a 717 OPS and a 97 WRC plus. However, not great StatCast metrics, indicates some regression there. Also, he's been an outfielder for all of his career, so I don't know why he's going to be like suddenly playing third base for Detroit. Zach McKinstry, a 302 OBP last year and a 79 WRC plus, and then Andy Ibanez had a 744 OPS and a 101 WRC plus, but probably going to play a lot of second base at least early on until Colt Keith is ready to go. Even then, I don't know how much he'll play third base. He could play in the outfield as well. Really, there's just not a whole lot of good options here, and the fact that they're going to constantly have to start one, if not two of those guys in the batting order is a very, very dark sign for the ceiling of this team.
Yeah, I did not realize that Javi Baez's OPS was below 600. That is crazy. He has fallen off so much since getting to Detroit. It's unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
Braden, who is your breakout pick for the Tigers?
My breakout pick for Detroit is going to be their number 10 prospect in Parker Meadows. Batted 145 plate appearances last year, and I liked what I saw in the small sample size. His walk rate was very good, up near 12%. I think the biggest thing to like about him is, StatCast can track like the rolling expected weighted on base percentage ex WOBA, and it started off really blue, and then constantly further out like the last little bit of the season was just red, slowly rising. So he started to figure things out a little bit. Very, very good eye at the plate. He's up in like the 80th percentile for chase rate. Very, very good speed. Great defender as well. He was worth 5 fielding runs and 1 base running run last year in his 145 plate appearances in, I believe that's like 20 or 30 games. So overall, very, very positive outlook for him. So I think that he's going to outperform Baseball Reference's expected 746 OPS. I think he'll be closer to 770, and the Tigers need all the offense they can get, and I think he'll be able to provide some of it.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree, and I think he's got a great opportunity atop that Tigers lineup to really make a name for himself. I'm going to go with Colt Keith, who I mentioned. Just signed an extension a couple weeks ago, guaranteed $28.6 million over the next 6 years, and that can get up to $82 million over the next 9 years. Projected to start at second base on opening day, but he can play some third base as well. You mentioned the left side of that infield is far from great, so you could get some time over there. Dude is sensational at hitting for his age. At 21 years old last season, hit 306 with a 380 on base percentage and a 552 slugging percentage across AA and AAA with 27 homers, 101 RBIs, and 87 runs. In his minor league career, he never had an OPS below 789, and that came when he was only 19 years old. So I think he's going to be a very, very key contributor right away and a very promising spot in the Detroit lineup for years to come.
Yeah, I'm not too familiar myself with Colt Keith. So I'm not, an expert on his game by any means, but the Tigers have seemed to hit well on a lot of their recent draft picks, and I think Colt Keith is another example of that.
As for the Cleveland Guardians, Braden, how are the Guardians projected to line up this coming year?
Guardians have Bo Naylor behind the dish, Kyle Manzardo and Josh Naylor at first base. Naylor will probably DH quite a bit as well. Andres Jimenez at second base. Brian Roquillo at shortstop. I don't know if it's Brian or Brian. Jose Ramirez at third base. Stephen Kwan in left field. Miles Straw in center. And Ramon Laureano in right field. And then for the pitching staff, you have Shane Bieber, Tanner Bybee, Tristan McKenzie, Gavin Williams, and Logan Allen. And out of the bullpen, you have Emmanuel Clase, Sam Henches, and Trevor Steffen.
Let's go ahead and get things started with J-Ram, Jose Ramirez. I have him at number 14 in categories leagues, number 15 in points. This is a guy who was going top 5 in drafts last season, the number 1 third baseman off the board. He was going top 2 in a lot of drafts as well, actually, with how scarce third base was. I know he went number 2 in our main league that we did last year. But the StatCast metrics would indicate that he slightly underperformed. Hit 282 with an expected batting average of 299. His xWOBA of 359 was 13 points higher than his actual WOBA of 346. The lineup around him just scares me a little bit. You mentioned earlier that there's just no power bats in this lineup, so his run potential is probably a little bit limited compared to what it has been in years past. But I think with Steven Kwan above him in the order, he's still got plenty of RBI opportunity, despite his RBIs going from 126 in 2022 to 80 last year. And obviously can run as well, had 28 stolen bases. So in categories, he's a very, very good 5 category contributor. And you could argue, I think, that he could be ranked even higher than I have him. It's just the top 15 in drafts, in my opinion, are just so loaded that I can't put him above the guys in that range.
Yeah, you mentioned the concern with the runs for Jose Ramirez. I'm more concerned about the RBIs. I took him last year in one of those season-long Prize Picks entries, over 96 and a half RBIs. And whenever I was following along with those Guardians games, I would always see Jose Ramirez draws a walk with a guy on second base. Anytime there's a man in scoring position, opposing pitchers are going to pitch around him. He had 73 walks last year. Steven Kwan had 70. Sam, take a guess at how many third place Josh Bell drew.
Oh boy, I'm gonna say Josh Bell drew 40 walks.
You were very close on that estimate, actually. It was 43. But the fact that there is a 30 walk gap between first place and third place on that team, not a good sign. Teams fear Jose Ramirez a little bit too much for me to be, all in him in category leagues because I don't know if he's going to get the runs, the RBIs, or the home runs you need out of that spot there. So I'm out on him in category leagues for the most part at his current draft price. However, in points leagues, I love him because he's going to get points for the walks, going to get points for stolen bases, home runs. It's going to be a little bit limited. I think his ceiling is still high, but he has a very low floor. So there's some risk mitigated in there.
Let's talk about Tanner Bybee, who, despite probably not being the one or two even in that Guardians rotation, I think is the most prevalent for fantasy purposes. I have him at number 119 in categories, number 97 in points. And, last season showed a lot of promise, had a 2.63 ERA in the second half of the season, and a 3.34 ERA in the first half of the season is not too shabby either. So I think he's going to be in for a very, very good year too. Now, the expected metrics are certainly not as good as what his actual numbers were. I think his expected ERA was right around 3.8, 3.66, and his xFIP was 4.22. So probably not going to be repeating the 2.98 ERA he had last season. Probably more around 3.5 range. But considering how good Cleveland is at developing pitchers, even if he puts up a 3.7 ERA, I think he's going to have enough strikeouts and a good enough WHIP that he has plenty of value for fantasy.
Yeah, Bybee's in the same position as Tarek Skubal as well. Facing a mostly poor division, he's going to be putting up very, very good fantasy numbers. I think his numbers from last year are a little bit more sustainable than you might think. He had a 3.52 FIP overall. I think he's going to be somewhere in the 3.3s ERA wise. There's a case that he was Cleveland's best starting pitcher last year, ahead of Shane Bieber. And I don't know if he'll be repeating that again. But the fact that you can get him so much later and they have the ability to put up maybe comparable stats if they hit their peaks just speaks to his value. I am all in on Tanner Bybee from fantasy.
And yeah, I quite honestly do think that Bybee was the best pitcher in that rotation. So I think he's going to be the best pitcher in that rotation again this year as well. I think he's in a very good spot.
Especially if they trade Shane Bieber.
Yeah, there you go. As for Emmanuel Clase, I have him at number 54 in categories, number 71 in points. Took a bit of a step back last season from where he was in 2022. The expected ERA was 3.06. His actual ERA was 3.22, which was nearly 2 whole points down, or 2 whole runs down from his 1.36 in 2022 and his 1.29 in 2021. But that being said, I think Emmanuel Clase is still probably one of the top 4 closers in fantasy this year. Obviously, you got Devin Williams, Edwin Diaz, and Josh Hader, who I think are kind of in a tier of their own there. But Emmanuel Clase is as consistent as they come. Had 44 saves last season, which is crazy good for fantasy purposes. So even if he does have that slight regression in ERA, if he puts up 44 saves, I think you can live with that.
Yeah, to me, Emmanuel Clase and Joan Duran are basically in the same tier. They're very, very similar MLB caliber pitchers. I think fantasy caliber pitchers as well. So I feel like whichever one of those guys is on the board longer is the one I'm more likely to take. Same thing applies with Class A in points leagues and in category leagues as it does with Duran. I'm probably not taking him at his ADP in a points league, but I'm probably reaching a little bit for him in a category league just because of how valuable saves are. Saves are usually a category I target pretty much every year because a lot of the time you can kind of pick up a sneaky win in there most weeks if teams neglect the closer position. So I think Class A is probably a slightly better pick in category leagues and a slightly worse pick in points leagues than Duran.
Agreed. And yeah, I've got Duran as my closer five right behind Class A. So yeah, I would agree that they're right behind each other or right by each other, neck and neck. Then the last guy from Cleveland to touch on here is going to be Josh Naylor. I have him at number 115 and 130, respectively, in categories and points leagues. If Josh Naylor can stay healthy, I think he is being drafted way too low. His ADP is 128, which I mean I guess is right in line with where I am. But on ESPN, I think he's ranked like right around 180, which is just way too low for me. Hit 308 last season with an expected batting average of 293. And I think if he can get the homers up from, I think he hit what, 17 last season? Yeah, 17. I think he's somebody who's got 25 homer potential. And if he gets to that 25 home run mark, I think he's going to clear 100 RBIs as well. And if you clear 100 RBIs with a 308 batting average, that's pretty damn good. Now, the runs are not going to necessarily be there with how weak the bottom half of the lineup is. But I think the RBIs getting to hit right behind Jose Ramirez is going to benefit him tremendously. So this is somebody who I am targeting a lot with where he's going in drafts. And if he falls, I think that he's going to be a fantastic value.
Yeah, you hit on pretty much everything I was going to bring up. The fact that he gets to clean up all of those walks of Jose Ramirez, and really if he can just hit, 300 with runners in scoring position, should give him an easy like 40 to 50 RBIs over the course of the year. I would feel very, very comfortable drafting Josh Naylor as low as he's going in ESPN leagues. I think there's an argument to be made that he should be drafted no lower than, pick 140-ish. But I think where you have him and the general consensus is on his ADP is probably about accurate given the risk of his injuries.
And then, Braden, what do you see as the biggest strength of the Guardians this year?
I think the biggest strength of the Guardians is pretty obvious here, and it's going to be their starting pitching. You have Shane Bieber, who's been one of the American League's best pitchers for the last half decade. There is the issue of him potentially being a trade candidate, but if the Guardians trade him, they're going to get somebody else that they can bring in as a fifth starter and turn into a number one starter within 2 years. So not too worried about that front. Tanner Bybee was their best pitcher last year. He had a 2.98 ERA, a 1.18 WHIP, and a 3.52 FIP. So I think those numbers are pretty sustainable for the most part. Tristan McKenzie was injured for most of 2023, made just 4 starts, but he posted a 2.96 ERA in 2022, had a WHIP below 1. Gavin Williams was phenomenal last year, flew very much under the radar, had a 3.29 ERA, and struck out 8.9 batters per 9 innings. And then you have Logan Allen as the fifth starter. His WHIP was a little bit high last year, was at a 1.4, but he put up a sub-4 ERA. So if he can work on that WHIP going down a little bit, we could see the ERA drop a little bit as well, and he could be a nice number 5, or potentially even a number 4 or 3 for this Guardians rotation.
Yeah, it feels like Cleveland always just has a really solid rotation, regardless of the amount of turnover they have in a given year. So yeah, I think that's a very good call there. The biggest weakness, in my opinion, is going to be the bottom half of that lineup. The projected 5 through 9 in the batting order, as you mentioned, Ramon Laureano, Bo Naylor, Kyle Manzardo, Brayan Rocchio, and Miles Straw. I like Bo Naylor and Kyle Manzardo, but they're not sure things. And the other three of Laureano, Rocchio, and Straw, none of them had an OPS over 676, and Rocchio, I believe, had an OPS of 600 on the dot, and Miles Straw was below 600. And quite honestly, I think the bottom half of this lineup might be the only thing that's holding them back. You mentioned how good the pitching is, and I think that's a very good top half of the lineup as well. So I think if this 5 through 9 can step up, this could be a very sneaky good team, and potentially have a chance at winning the division this season. But I don't see that happening.
Yeah, I mean, the positive thing with the bottom half of that lineup is they all have pretty good gloves. I mean, you have Miles Straw, who, if he was not a good, elite defensive center fielder, would not be sniffing a major league roster. So it's kind of a necessary evil to be starting him. Maybe you hope that he has kind of a Kevin Kiermaier-esque season and gets the bat going a little bit, but I would not be holding out hope for that. Overall, the Guardians just feel like a team that's destined to win about 75 to 85 games and not fall anywhere outside of that range. They have very little variance, I think, barring just massive injuries either to them or to the rest of the AL Central.
And Braden, who do you have as your breakout player for Cleveland?
I'll go with Gavin Williams as my breakout player. Had a great start to 2023, a very small sample size, made 16 starts and just pitched 82 innings, but the underlying metrics look very, very good. He had a 3.29 ERA, 81 strikeouts in those 82 innings, and had a nice 85% barrel or 85th percentile barrel rate, and very, very solid across the board. I mean, I don't expect like a massive improvement. I don't think he's going to be pitching, in the 2.5 ERA range. But if he can get under 3, which I think is definitely a possibility, Guardians would absolutely take that. Has a very good fastball, a solid breaking ball as well. He doesn't beat himself is the big thing. The one issue with him is he doesn't get a whole lot of chases, just 22nd percentile in chase rate. So if he can work on that a little bit, should be a very nice season for Gavin Williams.
Yeah, I like Gavin Williams as well. And you mentioned the chase rate. I think the walks are a little bit of concern as well. I think if he's able to get the walks a little bit in line, which he has kind of struggled with his entire career in the minors leading up to the pros as well. So I don't necessarily think it's going to be an immediate fix, but I think if he's able to get it down relatively a decent amount from where it was in 2023, I think he could be um, a very solid piece of that rotation alongside Tanner Bybee and Shane Bieber. My breakout player is going to be Kyle Manzardo, who we mentioned a little bit earlier. Came over in that Aaron Civale deal right around the trade deadline last season. And it kind of seemed like Cleveland fleeced Tampa Bay in that trade, considering Kyle Manzardo is like a top 75 prospect in the majors. He hit 327 in high A and double A in 2022. However, hit just 237 in triple A last season. That being said, though, it was kind of a tale of two halves. Had a 783 OPS in AAA Durham with the Rays, and then after that trade, had a 938 OPS at AAA Columbia with the Guardians. Projected to slide in as the opening day first baseman and could get some looks at DH as well on days that Josh Naylor is at first. I think he could be a very solid difference maker for that bottom half of the Guardians lineup right away if he's able to get closer to what we saw in the second half of that season last year.
Yeah, I think so as well. The Guardians, you touched on how bad their bottom half of the batting order is. I think that he is going to be much needed in that 5 or 6 spot for them. Get at least a little bit of support behind Josh Naylor, because right now when Naylor gets on base and doesn't drive himself in with a home run, it is very unlikely that he's going to be scoring a run. So they need to figure something out with that, and I think Manzardo is a good candidate from within to do that.
Let's move over to the 4th place Chicago White Sox. Braden, how are they projected to line up?
They're going to have Martin Maldonado and Max Stassi behind the plate, Andrew Vaughn at first base, Nicky Lopez, Lenine Sosa probably splitting most of the time at second base. Paul DeJong will be the opening day starting shortstop most likely, but I would expect to see some Colson Montgomery, number 1 White Sox prospect at some point. Yoan Moncada is the starting third baseman. Andrew Benintendi's out in left field. Luis Robert in center, and Dominic Fletcher in right, with Eloy Jimenez as a designated hitter. Gavin Sheets will find some playing time between first base and DH, and potentially right field as well. He'll probably play in about, I would think, 70 to 80 games, assuming health. And then for the pitching staff, Dylan Cease, Eric Fetty, Michael Kopech, Mike Soroka, and Chris Flexen, with a bullpen that really has no notable names, if I'm being honest. Maybe Garrett Crochet is the best one there.
Yeah, pretty slim pickings on that pitching staff for Chicago. Let's get things started with Luis Robert, who I have at number 34 in categories leagues, number 35 in points, and I'm not taking him there. I'm just not. Last year was the first time in his career outside of that shortened 2020 COVID season that he has stayed healthy for a full year. Played in 145 games, 38 homers, 36 doubles, hit 264 with 20 stolen bases. Now, if we get a fully healthy Luis Robert again, I'm going to look like a fool for not taking him at that range, because he is certainly well deserving of going in that range. But I don't know that you can bank on him staying healthy again for a full season. And, The power was kind of a first half surge. Hit 26 homers in the first 89 games of the season last year, and then in the final 55 games that he played in the second half, hit just 12. Now I say just 12 as if that's not a good amount, but that's not nearly the same pace as 26 homers is in 89 games. So it very very high risk high reward type player. I don't know that I'm comfortable spending a late third, early fourth round pick on Luis Robert.
Yeah, nor am I. Luis Robert is in basically the same situation as Jose Ramirez, except he has even less support around him, plus the injury risk. I mean, there is not a White Sox player behind him that I would even want hitting in the batting order if I were a Luis Robert fantasy owner. Really, your best option if you own him in fantasy is to hope that he gets traded somewhere because there is no chance he's going to be putting up those numbers again if he doesn't have anything like changing surrounding him. I don't think Eloy Jimenez is going to suddenly hit 30 home runs again. I don't anticipate a big power season from Andrew Vaughn. This is really just a horrendous White Sox lineup, and it's really going to hurt Luis Roberts' fantasy value as a result.
Yeah, that's pretty spot on there. Really, the only other notable impact player that's fantasy relevant for the White Sox is going to be Dylan Cease, who I have at 135 in categories, 114 in points, and you're fully banking on a bounce back season this year if you're a Dylan Cease owner. In 2022 had a 2.2 ERA. That went from 2.2 to 4.58 in 2023, which that was more than double what it was the year prior. The expected ERA was 4.13, and I think his FIP was right around 3.8. So I think we'll get closer to that range, probably around a low 4, high 3 ERA if you're a Dylan Cease owner. But I mean, I don't think you're going to be getting nearly what you would be getting in that 2022 season with Dylan Cease. I don't see it. He was a slightly worse in the second half as well compared to the first half, which I think is another red flag. First half ERA was 4.3, second half ERA was 4.96. So I don't know that I'm going to be taking Dylan Cease either with where he's going.
I think I'm a little bit higher on Cease than you are. I think the biggest upgrade is going to be not having Tim Anderson as a defensive shortstop behind him. Tim Anderson is a terrible defender and probably has cost Cease some runs over the course of the last couple of years. Now, granted, this not going to fix everything, but I think having Paul DeYoung or Colson Montgomery there, as well as Nicky Lopez now at second base, should help a little bit, at least in the middle infield, and kind of save a couple of runs, a couple of hits. I expect Cease's ERA to kind of be in the mid threes, with potential to get into the low threes. I think he's going to be significantly better than last year, but not going to reach those 2022 heights yet.
The biggest strength of this White Sox team, and let me tell you, there's not a lot to choose from here if we're talking strengths of this White Sox team. I think it's that you might finally have a healthy Luis Robert, in all honesty. This team sucks. Spoiler alert, I think they're going to finish comfortably last in the AL Central this season. I'll save the rest of that for when we do our standings predictions, but seeing Robert stay healthy for a full season is certainly promising. The big question, though, which I think we both brought up, is can he do it again? And I think we're both skeptical of that. Last year was the only time he's done it, as we mentioned, so I don't know that it's going to be happening again this season, and especially if it doesn't happen again this season, this White Sox team is going to be bad.
Yep. And tying into that, I think the weakness for the Chicago White Sox is their power bats. Luis Robert, when he's on the field, should bring the boom. He had 38 home runs last year, but there is nobody else in this team I'm confident in hitting, 20 to 25 home runs even. Andrew Vaughn last year had 615 plate appearances. He hit 21. Eloy Jimenez had 489 plate appearances. He hit 18. Jimenez has not played more than 122 games in any season of his career, and no one else on the Chicago White Sox roster had more than 11 home runs in 2023. This team, honestly, might be the worst power hitting team of the most recent MLB era, with this kind of surge of all power, no getting on base approach. So the White Sox, I think, comfortably are in that consideration for the number one pick. It's going to be them, the Las Vegas A's, and probably like the Washington Nationals.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. And Braden, I'll send it right back to you. Who is your breakout player for the White Sox?
Well, my pick pretty much by default here, because there's almost nobody young on this White Sox roster either, is going to be Shane Drohan, who comes over as a Rule 5 pick from the Boston Red Sox. He struggled at AAA last year, had a 6.47 ERA and a 1.87 WHIP in 21 appearances. However, he got sent down to AA, and following that demotion, made 6 starts, had a 1.32 ERA and a .82 WHIP in 34 innings pitched, struck out 36 batters. Chicago's likely going to use him out of the bullpen as opposed to being a starting pitcher, and I think this is best because he is a volatile pitcher, very high strikeout, very high walk numbers. He's probably best suited for 1 to 2 innings at a time. I think he's in line for a decent year on the South side. I don't expect him to be, a sub 3 ERA as a Rule 5 guy, but if he can be, in the mid to high threes, I think by White Sox standards, that counts as a breakout.
Yeah, I like that pick. I'll go with another pitcher here, and this is not really a breakout. It's more of a re-emergence. I'm going to go with Eric Fetty. And you might be thinking, what the hell is a 30-year-old with a career 5.4 ERA doing on here as a breakout pick? He went to Korea last season after struggling with the Nationals the year prior, and he was quite good in the KBO. Had a 2 flat ERA, a .95 WHIP, and 209 strikeouts over 180 innings pitched. He also won the KBO equivalent of both the Cy Young and the MVP. Now, I would be less optimistic on Fetty if we hadn't seen a pitcher recently go to the KBO and come back and be much better than they were prior. But Merrill Kelly was kind of in that same boat as Fetty. He was in the KBO from 2015 to 2018, and he was nowhere near as good as Eric Fetty was in his time there. So I think Eric Fetty is probably not going to be a guy who is going to be, right around a low 3 ERA, but I think he's going to be much lower than the 5.4 career ERA that he has been.
Yeah, I'm not super sold on Fetty. I think he'll be, better than when we last saw him, but I would be skeptical to see him post an ERA below 4.5. I think with Merrill Kelly, the difference there is he spent, what is it, 4 full seasons over in Korea, and I would assume completely relearned how to pitch essentially. Fetty was there for 1 year. I don't think there's anything that's going to magically change him over that time frame. I think he's just kind of a quad A guy essentially, where the KBO is like basically quadruple A. So I think him performing well there is going to maybe translate slightly to the MLB, but not significantly in any way.
And yeah, that could very well be the case. Let's wrap things up here with the Kansas City Royals, who finished last in the AL Central last year with over 100 losses. Braden, how are the Royals projected to line up this year?
Fangraphs has Salvador Perez as the starting catcher. I would expect to see a lot of Freddie Fermin there. I think Salvador Perez's best days as a catcher are behind him. I think he'll be DHing quite a bit, but they have Perez there for, the starting catcher. Vinny Pasquantino at first base with a little bit of Nick Prado action. Michael Massey at second base. Bobby Witt Jr. at short. Michael Garcia at third base. MJ Melendez in left field. Kyle Isbell in center. Hunter Renfroe in right field. And then they have Nelson Velasquez, Vinny Pasquantino, MJ Melendez, and Salvador Perez, essentially with a 4-way split of the DH duties. Like I mentioned, I think Perez is going to be DHing for the most part. Cole Reagans is going to be their ace. They also have Brady Singer, new additions Michael Waka and Seth Lugo, and then Jordan Lyles, the Chad innings eater, returns. And then out of the bullpen, not a whole lot going on there, but they brought in Will Smith. So they're guaranteed a World Series ring.
Yeah, there you go. World Series Royals 2024 confirmed. Let's go ahead and get things started with Bobby Witt, who I am very high on. I have him at number 3 in categories leagues, number 9 in points leagues. And if let's talk about categories leagues here exclusively for a moment. Bobby Witt hit 30 homers and stole 49 bases last season. I think it's not crazy to say that he could be a guy who hits 35 homers and steals, 55, 60 bases this season. His expected stats would indicate that he underperformed. He hit 276 with an expected batting average of 294. His expected WOBA was 26 points higher than his actual WOBA, and he was 100th percentile in sprint speed. The other thing, his defense as a rookie was not good. His defense last year was quite good. He was 94th percentile in terms of fielding run value, according to Baseball Savant. There's really not a whole lot to dislike about Bobby Witt. In a points league, the only reason he's a little bit lower is because he does not take a lot of walks, which is not an issue in categories leagues. But for a categories league, if you have a top 3 pick and Ronald Acuna and Julio Rodriguez are both off the board, do not think twice about taking Bobby Witt.
Easily. Speaking with a real life perspective as opposed to a fantasy perspective, how many guys in Major League Baseball do you think are probably the favorite to win a Silver Slugger and a Gold Glove at their position? Because Bobby Witt very well could be the only one. I mean, you have Mike Trout if he's healthy, potentially Ronald Acuna, not great defensively. Aaron Judge maybe could win both, but really Bobby Witt almost stands alone there. And I think he's going to be due for probably close to a 7 or 8 WAR season, which would be very, very remarkable. Um, I think he's going to probably put up, at least 30 home runs, at least 65 stolen bases. I'm a little bit more bullish on his speed. So I think he's a no-brainer at pick 3.
Let's talk about the ace of the staff this year, and that is going to be Cole Ragans. I have him at number 105 in categories leagues, number 83 in points leagues. Will have starting pitcher and relief pitcher eligibility, so you get a nice little bit of versatility there with him. It was very much so a tale of two halves for Cole Ragans last year. After he was traded from Texas to Tampa, let's start with when he was on Texas. In 24 and a third innings pitched, a 5.92 ERA. After he was moved to Kansas City, he had a 2.64 ERA in 71 and 2/3 innings pitched. The strikeout percentage went up, the walk percentage went down, and I think the lineup around him is probably going to be the one thing holding him back. But I think Cole Ragans, there's a lot to like about him. He's got very, very good pitch mix, a lot of pitches that can put guys away, and his Statcast page is a lot of red. So I would be very, very high on Cole Ragans if you're able to get him at a decent cost.
Yeah, I agree with Ragans as well. It feels like there's a lot of teams within the American League Central or within the American League in general that just struggle to hit lefties consistently. And Cole Ragans' ability to throw just nasty pitches as a left-hander is extremely, extremely good and will translate to fantasy as well as real life. So I think Cole Ragans, where he's going right now, is a definite buy.
Moving on over to Vinny Pasquantino. I have him at number 126 in categories 142 in points. And he, unfortunately, went down with a season-ending injury last season. I believe it was a torn labrum after it was diagnosed. I think he just had some shoulder soreness initially, but was potentially playing through that, and that could be why his numbers were down last season. Had a 247 batting average, an expected batting average of 282, and had a xWOBA 23 points higher than his actual WOBA. Is not going to run. Did not steal a single base last season. Only stole one in 2022. So don't rely on him for speed. But I think that in a categories league, he's going to be a solid 2, maybe 3 category contributor in batting average, RBIs, and potentially home runs as well. So I think if you're able to get him, kind of after that second tier of second base or of first baseman. Well, I guess it wouldn't even be the second tier really. After like the third or fourth tier of first baseman, I think he's a guy who could be a very nice starting corner infielder, or a utility bat in your league.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people pretty high on Vinny Pasquantino coming into this year. I think Foolish Baseball is one of the big guys pushing his propaganda, so I will trust him on that. Very, very good Statcast metrics across the board. I would probably lean with him a little bit more in the points leagues as opposed to the categories leagues. His walk rate is about average, so I mean he's going to get a couple of extra points compared to some other guys based on the walks, but I think really the rest of the lineup surrounding him is not super phenomenal, and I wouldn't trust him necessarily to get the RBIs and runs needed. But I think he's going to get on base quite a bit and should get plenty of points from hits.
And then the last guy to very briefly mention here is going to be Salvador Perez. I have him at 141 in categories, and I do not have him inside my top 150 in points leagues. He does not take walks. That is the primary reason, and strikes out a good bit as well. His walk percentage is actually first percentile last year at 3.3%. Not good. And quite honestly, I think we're going to see the beginning of the end for Salvador Perez this year. Going to be 34 years old. And after that 2021 season where he hit 48 homers, it's just been steadily downhill since. He's probably going to hit right around 240, 250. He hit 255 last year. His expected batting average was 266, so it could potentially be closer to 260. But I think the age is going to finally catch up with him. Not going to catch a lot of games. Like you mentioned, I think he's going to get more first base time and DH time than anything, which is probably good for him. Much better for his body. But yeah, I would not be too excited about Salvador Perez, even though he's probably going to be a back end starting catcher in fantasy.
Yeah, I think with Salvador Perez, the end is pretty much already here. We saw last year where his total base hits jumped from 113 to 137, and his extra base hits decreased by two. He is not really able to leg out any extra base hits at this point in his career unless it goes over the fence. And I think we're going to start to see an even sharper drop off in power. I would be shocked if he hits more than 15 home runs this year. Even coming from 23 the last 2 years, I think we're due for major, major regression. And in all honesty, I think he gets, unofficially cut at the end of the year. And by that, I mean he retires and is given the dignity of not being cut.
Yeah, I could very well see that happening for sure. Braden, what do you see as the biggest strength of this Royals team?
Well, I think the biggest strength of this team, it kind of ties to their youth a little bit, and it's going to be their speed. Only two teams stole more bases than the Royals in 2023. I don't expect too many more teams to steal more bases than they do in 2024. Bobby Witt had nearly a 30-50 campaign, has a great chance to do so this season. I would expect him to do that if healthy. Michael Garcia and Dairon Blanco each put up 20 plus stolen bases. Four more players in the Royals stole seven or more bags last year. I think Drew Waters and Kyle Isbell combined for 27 in the center field spot. The Royals were also second in MLB in triples. They had 43. Only one team below the Royals, top 31. So significantly head and shoulders above most of the rest of the league. The Royals are just always a threat to take that extra base, whether that's after a single, they stretch into a double with a stolen base, or by stretching a double into a triple. They're a very, very fun team to watch in the base paths.
Yeah, absolutely. The speed is definitely going to be one of their strengths this season. The biggest weakness, in my opinion, is the pitching staff, primarily the bullpen. I like Cole Reagans, as I mentioned, and I think Michael Waka and Seth Lugo are nice additions for that rotation. But the bottom half of the rotation and the bullpen are not good. Their bullpen had the second worst cumulative ERA last season, behind only the Rockies. And the lineup in the rotation should be slightly better, but you're not going to win games if you can't hold leads, and you can't really rely on anybody in this rotation to give you 7 innings consistently, and put yourselves in positions to win games. So I just don't know that this pitching staff. I think the lineup is going to be better than it was last season, and I think they're going to be able to do more offensively. But I just don't know that the pitching staff is going to be able to replicate that.
Yeah, I mean, we're both pretty big baseball fans, and I can name four of the top 10 Royals relief pitchers with confidence this year. So, given the fact that I can't name over half of them with 100% certainty, is a very, very big red flag, I think.
Yeah, that's a very, very good way of putting it. I don't know that I'd be able to get more than four either, or even get to four for that matter. But Braden, who is your breakout pick for the Royals this year?
I'll go with Michael Garcia here. He had just a 681 OPS last year, which was only an 88 OPS plus, but I think he's due for significant improvement in 2024. He's obviously a great fielder, was in the 94th percentile in fielding run value last year, 98th percentile in outs above average, and he's also a great base runner. I mentioned the stealing bases. But at the plate, I think he's due for some improvement. Had 82nd percentile expected batting average last year, 87th percentile in expected exit velocity, 93rd percentile hard hit percentage, 76th percentile sweet spot percentage, 89th percentile in chase rate, 82nd percentile in whiff rate. A lot of those signs point to him having significant power improvement this year. And I think he might be a candidate to hit, 15 home runs and put up, a 15-40 season, which for the Royals would be massive. I think Michael Garcia probably not going to work his way into all-star conversations this year, but I think he's not out of the realm of possibility for that. I think he will be an all-star for sure by the 2025 season.
Yeah, I really like that pick. I think he's a promising young name in that Royals system. I'm going to go with Michael Massey, who is projected to start at second base this year for Kansas City. The numbers last year were not good. He had 229 with a 274 on base percentage and a 381 slugging percentage, a 655 OPS, which is not good. His expected numbers, though, give me some reason for optimism. His expected batting average was 260, 31 points above his actual batting average. His expected slugging percentage was 432, 51 points above his actual slugging. And his WOBA was 283. His ex-WOBA was 319. So I think he will get a pretty big step up in 2024. He hit 312 across AA and AAA in 2022. So a very, very good minor league hitter. Just needs to make that jump to the majors. So I think there's reason to believe that Michael Massey could find it in 2024.
Yeah, I think with Massey, we're going to see kind of a more of a subtle improvement as opposed to like a massive breakout. I think by 2025, we're really going to see him kind of hit those heights. But I think this year, it's just more about finding that consistency. Last year obviously wasn't great. I think he'll probably improve a decent bit this year and be a popular breakout pick for next year. I'm just not sure I can say that he will be, a significantly above average player in 2024.
Yeah, I can't argue with that too much. But ladies and gentlemen, that is going to do it for today's episode. As always, hope you enjoyed. I'm struggling to think today. It's Monday. Hope you enjoyed, and we will catch you later this week with our final American League divisional preview.
Adios.